know, even if it's consumption of water and consumption of and road and other basic necessities, that's going to form a bigger proportion of a poor household's income than a rich household's income. I don't know if you have any.
Well, I would say that basically, if you were to look at using consumption taxes, I think that they're a good thing. The idea of it is good, because if you're putting savings aside, capital investment, these are all good things. They're good for society. Where I think it does fall down is with poor households. But I think you always have to have your eye on how the weakest are affected. I think any civil society, you can really judge it by its treatment of the poorest, of the most vulnerable.
Rawls's idea of GDP really should only be how well off is your worst off person.
Well, to a degree, I think that's a fair assessment of a society, because you'll always have success, but success doesn't need help the way that the impoverished do. So how do you control that? I think for an example, if we were to say, what about congestion charges? That's a really good one to talk about in that respect, because people will say, well, poor folks can't afford to drive into the city now. Realistically, rich people can always afford to do a lot more different things. Fly jets, drive bigger, flasher cars with bigger engines and all of that. But what about saying, well, if you're below a certain income threshold, you get 5 passes a year or a month, and you can sell them on eBay if you want. You know,
yeah. I think
we don't really care, but what we do want to do is have some form of balancing factor, and I think that the current taxation draws in or around 40% of income tax comes from the top 6.5% of earners. Up until recently, somewhere between 34 and 40% of our entire workforce pays zero tax, and I just don't see the fairness in that. But I also don't see the fairness in someone who's earning 100 million a year paying no tax. I mean, that's insane. What about the assets that they hold? What's a fair way to tax assets?
Because Stop picking on Bono.
You can't just move a field or say, like, oh, right, I'm moving that field offshore. It's stuck. And I think that's one of the beauties of it. If we had a comprehensive land registry, at the moment it's half registry of these, half land reg, we don't really know what's going on sometimes, but if they took the time to do it, you could actually make it really fair. The people in Mayo don't need the same amount of spend per head as they do in Dublin. And yet inadvertently they pay for it, because if you earn a lot of money in Mayo, it probably ends up on a Dublin road. When it goes through the system, where are we spending the most money? So that should be local. I think that sort of local and sort of national tax. National tax would be on the consumption side, on the petrol side. Local tax would be things like property and other things that are very localized.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things that is probably not understood well enough by the vast majority of policymakers and politicians is this idea, I don't understand it fully either, it's the idea of a land value tax. And it's regarded in terms of theoretically, it's regarded as easily the most equitable and stable solution to a property tax need. And obviously I'd need to double to check that these are the claims that are true, but certainly the advantages are just what you've discussed there, is that you can't hoard land or just store it.
Well, you can, but you'll pay for it.
Exactly, yeah. You can't do it for free. You pay for the cost you incur. But I think generally we are a low tax society, and people don't appreciate that. People assume we're a high tax society because any tax people know when they pay it, they know they're paying a lot of tax. But generally, we're a very low tax society on the vast majority. As you said, 2/3 of workers pay less than 10% of their income over in income tax every year. One question I would have is that regardless of how we structure it between consumption taxes or income taxes or public resource usage taxes like road or congestion or water, or carbon, which is going to come in as well, do we have the tax take right if we're only getting maybe 33, 34 billion out of maybe 170 billion in total GDP? Is that enough to give us all the public services? This is probably a wider question, but if we're spending 55, 60 billion, then we've got to ask ourselves, where are we going to strike the balance? Douglas Adams would say 42 billion, that's where you're always going to end up. But I think we need, my opinion is that we need to know where the goal is before we know the balance of the tax.
I think that raises some interesting questions, and they're actually not really so much economics questions as political ones, which are, what is the role of the state? What services must they provide? They can't be privatized, subbed out, or anything else. What is the core function of the state? And if you were to tell me that education is the core function, or the military protection of the country is the core function, I would argue they're not. I think they're important functions. I also don't know necessarily that they can be privatized, but the core function is to ensure that it's basically a safe society that allows people to live, get on with their life, and where you're unmolested as possible, that certain services are provided, but you have to draw the line. So when you say you have to balance the books, it's a chicken and egg situation. We need 34 billion. Well, that's because we're doing it this way. Like, how much money is lost in the collection of income tax, and then its redistribution? Those are figures that we don't know. What we do know is we pay this much tax, and this is what it costs to run, say, for instance, the public service. What we don't know is how do you say, like, what is the cost benefit of a petrol tax versus our current system of car tax based on engine sizes? And that's what I've no idea. And so they're confounding questions.
The huge issue for me is, I love history and I love popping into museums and all that kind of stuff. Last week, just around the corner, there's the Revenue Commissioner's Museum in Dublin Castle. I don't think it'll be everyone's cup of tea.
I think it doubles over as a torture museum. Medieval torture museum in Chester, and that are apparently sister museums.